for the 24th of March 2016. And we have only one item on our agenda today. But quickly to review, last meeting we mostly spent time looking at the Flatten project and scope the TSC issue, which was issue number 59. That's since been closed, but still somewhat live in that the ideas there are following over into to other work that's going on, including the item that we have on the agenda today. I think we can probably skip a stand-up unless anyone wants to object to skipping it this week. Yeah, actually, that might not be the best idea. Maybe what we should do is scope the stand-up. It's awkward for those of us who attend both CTC and TSC meetings to do this twice a week, but I know that that's not ideal for people who, particularly Brian, who don't attend the CTC meetings. So maybe what we should do is scope the stand-up to things that are fairly relevant to TSC level. I'll put some words together for that for next week to stand up. But let's move on from now. So the item that I put on the agenda was issue number 77, which is proposed Node Foundation mission structure and strategy. This is a deck that I've put together that I'd like to take to the Foundation board. It's mainly formed of my personal opinions. So what I'm looking for is guidance, high-level guidance on other people's thoughts about this, and also, if possible, I'm not expecting full sign-off, but I wouldn't mind being able to go to the board and saying that this is a presentation that is that has some buy-in from the rest of the TSC, that it's not just a personal thing that I'm trying to push here. So I wanted to open a discussion to see if anything in there is resonating with others, and if you think that this is a helpful approach to answering some of the questions we've had, but also some of the concerns that have been raised by the board with regard to our activity. So there's been a few comments in the issue itself, but
yeah.
Would anyone like to start off discussion?
So I was actually very happy. It seems it's concise. I agree with most of it. What I didn't really know is, like, you're speaking of a business executive and a technical executive. Like, are these like new roles within the foundation, or do we already have a technical executive and it's you, but I didn't know you were called that way, or like how does it? Is it?
No, they're groups, and they already exist. So they're just a term for talking about the groups that execute within the foundation. So the business executive is the group that is led by Michael, and also now has an education coordinator, has PR person. So that is that group, and the technical executive is just a term for us, and basically the stuff that happens on GitHub. It's not a person; it's just a term for the group. If you look at the chart at the bottom, that's where they're labelled, and I think Brian's comment about moving that up is probably a good idea. I was just trying to find good terms to describe the three different groups. It seems like that's not resonating very loudly, but I'm open to suggestions on alternative names. The term executive makes more sense for Michael's group, but we're also an executing body as well, so that's why I chose that for us. And that includes more than the TSC. The TSC is just the peak body within that, the group, the body that answers directly to the board. But it also includes the collaborators and the CTC.
Right, it makes sense to me now. Sorry. Executive to me usually means like, hey, a person.
A person, right? Okay. Well, I mean, I could try and clarify the wording there to make sure it's talking about a group.
You could just say like, this is a group, like, or currently this is the TSC. Then like it becomes immediately clear for.
Yeah, I would just, instead of technical executive, I would just say technical committee.
Is it really a committee though? You know, when we consider that there's like everything else involved, maybe just call it like technical group.
A technical board.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We've got the TSC, but when I talk about the technical executive, I'm talking about what the TSC represents, the executing group that the TSC represents, which is more than just one group that meets. So there's the TSC, the CTC, the collaborators, and the members of working groups. And the TSC is responsible for pulling things together, but they are not the sole group.
Right.
So when I talk about responsibilities of the different groups, particularly the technical executive, the TSC is responsible for delivering according to that, but it doesn't mean that they do that work necessarily.
Right, so I guess you're saying you could substitute executive for team, and it would mean the same thing, is that?
Yeah, I think so.
You really mean the whole technical team or the whole business team is when you're referring to those two?
Yep.
I think so. The Node.js Foundation structure one, with the big bubbles and everything. There's this overlap area between business exec and TSC technical exec. I think there should be like an arrow in there on what that overlap means, and it probably means facilitation. Because the one thing that gets kind of confused here is that this business side is hiring community managers, but part of that role is not making decisions, but just guiding and facilitating, rather than being like, you know, the person who makes the decisions for the community, right? And I think that kind of describes the overlap pretty well.
So what would you put there? What would you say in there?
Just facilitation. So I would say like the overlap between the business executive and the technical executive side is facilitation, basically.
Okay.
For instance, like, you know, for instance, Tracy was hired to do a bunch of stuff coordinating the business community pretty directly, but she's also working with the community. She's not making decisions for the Node School people, but she is trying to figure out what they want, what they need, and help them along, and integrate that into the overall education strategy of the foundation, right? She's meant to be a supportive resource sort of for the education community in Node, right, not just for the business community.
So the other thing I didn't that is not meant to represent is that the technical bit is not meant to represent community as well. So as I said in another part of it, that community, the responsibility for community and open source ecosystem is shared by both the business and the technical sides. That the business side has the facilitation role. And the technical side needs to find a role in there as well. It's not as obvious, although it's there. I think the overlap that I wanted to highlight, and I did have a slide in there that I took out, was about communication and the connection between them, like the way that we have individuals that are on some of the committees that are going on, like the marketing committee. We have you involved here on meetings and on GitHub, and the same thing happens on with the board, that there's communication both ways. There's individuals that span those groups.
So, could you go over like what the actual proposal is here? Is the proposal just that we should reach agreement on this on the foundation mission statement section of it, or is there something else?
Yeah, in concrete terms, the proposal is to reach agreement on the mission statement, and then following on from that, there's no concrete proposal. I'm not suggesting that we adopt any sort of statement or something actionable, necessarily actionable, but more of a. I'm asking that we work towards a process whereby the different groups are responsible for discrete areas, and that responsibility entails answering to the board for certain things. So the three areas that come out of the mission statement are open source. Sorry, there's Node Core, then there's the open source ecosystem around Node, then there's the business ecosystem around Node. So the Node Core has been given to the technical executive as something that we do. We execute on that. We look after Node Core, and we have independence on that. So that's already established. That's fairly obvious. Open source ecosystem can probably be described more in terms of community, although community does overlap with commercial as well. But that spans into areas like Express and the kinds of things that we were looking at with possible expansion under the umbrella program. That I'm suggesting that executing in that area requires a coherent strategy to be developed between both the business side and the technical side, and that the board needs to have sign-off on that. So the board needs to be involved in the discussion, needs to be able to object or shape that in some way. That there's not the level of independence that we have with Core, that we have a responsibility to make sure that if we choose to act in that area, say for example we say with Express we want to bring it on as a full member, full part of the foundation, that's part of our strategy and that gets approved by the board. But we have to propose that and the board has to sign off on that, so we can't just go and unilaterally decide to do something like that when it's outside of Core. And then on the commercial ecosystem side, that is the area within which the business executive is concerned. They need a strategy that involves looking after or working around and with the business, the commercial ecosystem, to make sure that the foundation is adding value there and building or is facilitating a healthy commercial ecosystem, and the strategy should involve that, and then getting sign off on the board for that strategy. So it's coming out of the strategy development comes out of the mission statement, but there's also fairly clear lines of responsibility there to the board for different parts of that to be led by the different groups. That's not entirely. I know that doesn't sound so clear, but it probably. I'm hoping that the tech makes it a bit more clear than I just described it. Does that sound reasonable and actionable, or concerns?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds reasonable. I think I think this is a very solid step in the right direction compared to where where the discussion has been. So it's definite progress. I think we still need to work out some of the details, but this gets us to a much better place than we were.
Yeah, details of the
I mean, it captures what I would have already thought was the agreement, right? Like, is there anything that's changing here in terms of people's minds?
And that's the thing that I was trying to tackle here, is that we haven't really had this discussion. This is the missing piece, the whole basis for how we operate. we never had that discussion because we were so busy saving Node. We were healing a fork. We were getting a new version out. We were, all that stuff. We were so busy focused on that we kind of forgot some of the important bits. That's what I feel anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, writing it down definitely was missed. I just, I looked at this and said, I think this is the way that I was thinking it was, and I guess there are a few subtleties about, like, the commercial side being, driven maybe more from the business side than the technical side, but largely I'm hoping, the business side is going to look at this and say, yeah, okay, this is what we were thinking we were doing as well, right? I could be wrong, though.
Oh, I hope so too.
I mean, so if you look at the actual bylaw structure, this is pretty close. I mean, there's a little bit in there about kind of member representation and what that means. And so, for instance, like the marketing committee is a member committee under the bylaws and things like that. But they're basically accountable to the board as well. So that's a little bit different. But in terms of the actual execution side, that actually does fall under like the people that get hired, right? So I think that insofar as this is not drawing the structural boundaries, but actually who is responsible for decisions and execution and who's ultimately accountable, I think that this draws that out pretty clearly, and is pretty much in line with how things work now. But there's never really been a diagram like this to explain it to people who aren't involved in this every day. I think that the main thing that is missing is you have a note in here how the incubator mentorship program fit in there. The line of the technical side and what is sort of acceptable for them to take on without the board is a source of contention, and probably something that we don't have consensus on, within the board, and I don't think that the TSC has consensus on, because every time that I've tried to write it up, I've found out that there's not a consensus. And so I appreciate that Rod is taking this on now, because like in my role in the foundation, I should not be driving things towards a particular decision. I should just be facilitating what the consensus seems to be, and being that there is no consensus, somebody's going to need to push this in a particular direction. So thank you, Rod, for taking this on.
No, that's exactly right. And the way I'm dealing with that incubation thing, because this slide, I developed this before we started talking about the restructuring thing, and it did have like libuv and express in there, but that leaving them in there as looking like top level projects, even with the term incubator in them, it looked too contentious, because it goes to some of the concerns that the board is raising, and what this does is kick that down the road and say, okay, there's stuff going on there, and there is a vague strategy being executed on, but we are accepting a responsibility for developing a coherent strategy and then getting sign-off on the board. We will submit that strategy to the board and make sure that we're all aligned on that. So we're going to do our core stuff, that's cool, but when we step outside of core, we accept having to answer to the board to that. So we will come to you and say, this is what we figured out as our strategy. Can you approve that? Or even just getting the board involved in the discussion on that strategy.
Yeah, I also like the fact that this makes it clear the focus is on core node. So I think that's another benefit, not at this first discussion, not including those other ones, which would just complicate things.
I think that'll make the board happy as well.
Okay. The one other comment I did have, the mission was outlined as growing the adoption, and I wondered, is adoption just one of our metrics? Like, is it that we want to make Node the best runtime for development and deployment? Adoption is one measure of that success, but there might be others.
So I picked up on the comments there. The reason I'd like to stick with the increased adoption is that it's measurable and actionable, that we can say this is what we're driving for and this is what the outcome is that we should be looking for. And everything that matters pretty much should follow from that, that if we want to increase the adoption of Node, Node has to be awesome. and it has to be acceptable to a broad user base, that it has to find a place in the enterprise, that it has to be interesting and thrilling to hobbyists and individual developers. All of those things have to fit into place for it to be increasing adoption. And yes, there might be a time in the not too distant future where, if we're measuring adoption, that starts to flatten out. But that shouldn't change our focus on trying to keep on increasing the adoption, because it will drive everything else that we do. So it does. We may objectively fail according to this measure, but it still shouldn't change our execution strategy to not fail, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah, using it as a measurement makes 100% sense to me. I was just wondering if you think if your only goal is to increase adoption, you could do things which might increase adoption in the short term, but not in the long term. Whereas if it's like, I want to make it the best runtime, you might do things slightly differently that would mean that I get less adoption in the short term, but longer term I ended up with a better runtime. I don't know.
So I had a similar question, and I think that's been mostly answered. I think phrasing it as like saying that includes the word best at all is really very undefinitive, because that's very subjective. You can't really tell what the best runtime is. That might depend on what you're trying to do, right? So.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I think it's okay to be a little bit vague for now. But I believe that even if you were to specify other things you could measure, it would still not necessarily give us a lot of direction, because we have more questions that we are implicitly asking. What is Node for? Is it for web servers or for desktop apps, which people are both doing, right? Does increasing adoption mean more people install Node, or let's say Node gets embedded into some other thing and then people use it? Is that okay for us to I think it will still be very vague, and we don't have to bike shed here about the exact detail of what we're sort of going after, but more a general thing. And more people using Node seems like a great measure of success for the moment.
But at the same time, though, one of the other metrics that we can't ignore is the community engagement. So Node was becoming, if you look at the adoption of Node over the past few years, it's been steadily going up, but we reached a period of time where the number of contributions and commits were going down. So just increasing the adoption is not enough. It's also keeping the community of contributors healthy and keeping those contributions up as well. So I think it's not just a matter of adoption, it's health, right? We need to find some way of capturing the health of the community in that mission statement as well.
So I think I'd like to call something out real quick, because there seems to be a little bit of a contention between what are essentially goals and then what are kind of core responsibilities that we can't ignore. And those goals end up being goals within the confines of whatever these core requirements are, right? And a bunch of those are actually laid out in the TSC charter that's important past. So there's stuff in there like predictable releases and stability and stuff like that, and code quality, and just general kind of things that we need to make sure that we're doing. And then any goals basically get layered on top of that and within the confines of that, right? And I think community engagement isn't necessarily one of those in the charter that I can find. So that may need to be something that gets added to this mission statement as well as a goal on top of all that.
So on community engagement specifically, I think for me, I really strongly believe that what we're doing on governance and engagement is actually driving the health of Node and the adoption of Node, because it's making Node much more relevant to its users. But regardless of all that, you can see the discussion, the kind of discussion we're having here is the kind of discussion we should be having. So if we establish a minimum viable mission statement that includes enough vagueness, and you can see this one does, it's got words like health and fostering and encouraging, and the increased adoption, all the stuff we've been talking about here, there's this vague area that is intentional because it means that we can have these discussions about what that means. That when somebody presents a proposal, you can say, well, this is what I think that the mission is and how it should be outworking, and this is what how I think the proposal works against it, and whatever. But it's those areas of not they're not written out in legalese. They're areas where you actually have different opinions, and you can bring those opinions in and have a healthy discussion about how to achieve what you think are those goals. And we're not just being driven by a black and white document. So this is the kind of discussion we should be having. What does it mean to increase the adoption of Node? What does it involve? Health, what community engagement? This is the right discussions we should be having at each level of the foundation. And so this is like minimum viable mission statement to encourage those discussions, for everyone to bring their different opinions and use those as part of the decision-making process.
Maybe kind of piggybacking off that, I do agree with this. Maybe this idea of increasing adoption. It could be useful to specify that we want to increase adoption in the long term for Node. Because there's this discussion of, and of course, we can increase adoption in the short term very easily, but that may not be sustainable. But talking about like health of the project, getting more people involved, and thinking about this from my perspective in the inclusivity working group, increasing the diversity, of our contributors is a core part of that. But that does all kind of feed, increasing adoption over the long term. We have to have a healthy system to make sure that we have sustained increases in adoption over time. So maybe kind of working that out, fleshing out could be helpful.
I think, like to James's point, though, there was a period of time where Node was being heavily adopted and engagement in the project was going down. So it's not necessarily true that both of those line up with each other. Now, we believe that they do, and that we're growing even more now because of this. But it's not a given that increasing engagement in the project is a requirement for getting adoption. So I think that if that's something that people are really passionate about, then it probably should be called out a little bit more explicitly.
Yeah, because if it's going to be, I think the idea, as Rob mentioned, is that this is kind of used so that you can test ideas and options against it, right? And if it's, if community engagement is one of the core tests, actually calling it out would make sure that it's used as the test.
So what is it that you there's two questions here. One is, who is it that you want to engage? And I don't think the term community is acceptable here because it's the biggest hand wave ever. We can talk about users, that's a little bit more definable. And what is it that you want them to engage with?
But maybe it's the development community that we were talking about in this case. Adoption can be a proxy for, well, we want as many users using it, right? But I think in this case it was that it's the development community that, in addition to users using Node, we wanted an active and vibrant development community contributing to the development of Node.
So I don't know that you need to put the addressable market as part of the statement, right? Like, you could just say encouraging participation in the project is a goal and a requirement. And there are many ways that you can cut and slice and measure that. And when you do measure it, you're probably going to need to define sort of what the addressable community there is. But having as a goal increasing participation in the work would leave that open, right?
And we're limiting scope here to the core project as well. Good.
Well, so anything in that bubble, right? So the bubble that you have for the technical side, like increasing the number of participants in that bubble is a goal of the bubble.
I wonder if is that a TSC mission? Sorry, is that a technical executive mission rather than a foundation mission? Like we accept.
If the inclusivity working group is part of it, then probably yes, right? So.
Okay, so what I would say, like these things still seem to me to be like outworkings of a basic mission. So we say, okay, the basic mission, increase the adoption of Node. Okay, but as a technical executive, we accept the onus to do that over the long term, and that making investments in inclusivity will lead to payoffs down the track, and not short-term, short-term gain for long-term loss. That increasing participation in our technical activities is good for our own existence, and it also helps us to achieve that goal. I just wonder whether do they logically bubble up to a foundation-wide mission, because they seem fairly isolated to the technical side, technical concerns.
I guess for me, it comes to how much focus you want on those. Like, do you want the foundation, the non-technical foundation decision making, to use those as tests for the decisions they're making?
Yeah, that's
like.
Yeah,
are we trying to increase participation in the legal committee, for instance?
Oh, please no.
Well, see, so that's like, I mean, that's an area where, you know, increasing broad participation may not be a goal, and so it would then belong on the other side.
Right, but if the legal team is making a decision and it will negatively or positively affect, you know, the number of people contributing on the technical side, we would want them to factor that in, I think, right?
Yeah, but so the legal committee isn't enabled to just make decisions. Like, things get delegated to it, and then they basically write it up, and then the board has to pass it. So the board has representatives from the individual membership, and from the TSC in order to weigh in on that and its impact potentially on contributions. Right?
Well, let's use that as a hypothetical to play this out. So let's say that the legal committee recommends to the board that we adopt a CLA, a contributor license agreement, that has some certain level of hoops that you have to jump through in order to just make a basic contribution to Node, or that we should switch to some weird license that is difficult to understand. I don't know, just some legal requirement that does actually materially impact on our ability to engage developers. Do we want to be able to argue back on that on the basis of this is going to hurt Node in the long term because it's going to impact on our ability to attract new developers to core? Or do we want to be able to explicitly call it out in the mission statement, saying, no, this is going to impact our ability to increase whatever the wording was for engagement in core because of these reasons? Like, on what basis are we comfortable making that argument?
Right. You can always go back to, well, we can try and support it indirectly, but you want to make it a direct argument.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open either way. I personally don't want to complicate the mission statement too much, but I am recognizing that those of us here are very passionate about increasing engagement. This is actually a key passion that we have that is driving us, so maybe it does belong there. Not sure exactly how, but
yeah, I think it's kind of one of the unique things that deserves to be called out.
So something like the Node Foundation exists to increase the adoption of Node.js and the increase the engagement in the Node.js core project, or something like that. The participation.
The level of participation, or the increases.
I think participation is broader, so it gets us a lot of the non-core, non-code stuff in there too, which is probably what people want.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and leaving that vague for now, I think would be better for encouraging discussion later, but leaving it open for the time being.
Increasing the level of adoption and the level of participation in the
project.
project. Yeah, that sounds good.
Increase the adoption of Node.js and increase the participation in the community?
Do we want to say like community or project?
I think, yeah, project is good because it's community. It's a bit foggy as to how far.
I'd say something like, increase the participation of the community in the further evolution of Node or further development of Node.
So I do want to reiterate something that Rod said about using the word community. It's a very problematic word to use in statements like this because everyone who reads it has a very different idea of what it means. And sort of the scope of that community, there's a lot of like inherent personal bias for every person that reads it. So if the more that we can avoid that word specifically, the better.
So, to increase, how about just increase, or how about open participation?
Why don't we just say the level of participation? Like, do we need to qualify participation in any way? We want more participation in the project by all.
Yeah, I think
all groups.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's good because like later down the road, you may want to tie that to the growth of Node in general, right? So like, we're right now, the reality is that participation in core is actually growing faster than Node is growing in terms of users. But at some point, that will probably level off a bit, but we'll still want to be increasing it, and we'll want to probably tie that metric to some kind of metric about the usage of Node.
Yeah, like I could see, like you're probably thinking a ratio or something, which would you could see making sense.
Yeah, I mean, last month participation in core increased by something like 20–25%, which is Node usage is growing really fast, but it's not growing 20% a month. So right now we're actually doing like incredibly well. But at some point I think that we will have a saturation point on just people coming to core that were not engaged before, and then we'll see something closer to the growth of Node user base contributing to the growth of core.
Do we want to say the Node.js core project or just the Node.js project?
I think that so long as you're defining the TSC and the whole technical side as broader than core, you want to leave the mission statement part broader than core. If you want to say, okay, we're doing other stuff under here, but we don't want to increase participation in it only in core, then you would make the other statement, right?
Yeah, I think we can leave that loose. I'm not too worried that the legal. There's going to be a million people jumping into the legal team.
So here's some wording. So the Node.js Foundation exists to increase the adoption of Node.js and increase participation in the Node.js project.
Yeah. I guess that's what works the best.
I like it.
Yeah, good for me.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So I don't want to bike shed names too much, but I know that some people made comments about the executive language. I think one of the things that it does kind of say implicitly is that there's some level of accountability or responsibility for this stuff. That word specifically is going to be very confusing for a bunch of board members, I think. I can think of a few people, like in particular, that would just be very confused by that language. So I would like to find a new one, but probably something that gets at this is the level of responsibility for execution, not necessarily like an org chart structure, right?
But I think what Rod meant was the team. So I wonder if that's just a simpler word to use in its place.
Yeah, I'd be happy with technical team. I originally did have this set up with I had the executive, which was your side, Michael, and then the I can't remember what I had for the technical side. I think it was just technical, I think. But the executive made sense more for what you do or what's happening over on your side. But would you use a different term for your area? The business unit? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I was just going to say, why not business team and technical team? Like, it's a group of people, and I think you were looking at it as an inclusive. Like, it's not some subset of the team; it's the overall team. And then there was like the CTC, which is the subset that's sort of responsible for coordinating that.
Isn't the business executive like an actual thing in the foundation, though?
It
Let's
could
look
be, but
like
it probably wouldn't be called that. It would probably be called like the CTO or something like that. Or oh no, like COO or something. But no, I mean, the reality is that I think executive just broadly, not without business in front of it, would be a little bit more apt, because what essentially is happening is that people are hired to execute, just get things done on behalf of the board and on behalf of the technical side. Their role is to facilitate and to execute, and not to drive things in a really specific way that isn't in the interests of like the members or the board or the technical side, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think that like executive is probably the right word for that. It's the closest one that I can think of right now, at least.
It may be the right word, but it might just be me. But the connotation that I have with executive would not jump to that description. Like I would be thinking, I think
executive branch, right? Like I'm thinking executive branch of government in the way that.
But even like that in my mind implies the senior. It implies a hierarchical where they're at the top of the hierarchy as opposed to the overall team that's working on it.
Yeah, I guess that's an American problem, because
well, I think you're right. Yeah.
It may be, yeah, it may be like it's a cultural thing, but executive immediately jumps in my mind into somebody who's like in charge of the other people as opposed to just part of the team. And I think there'll be other people who have the same bias.
Well, but that's I think that's fair though, because foundations would normally have an executive director, and Michael is our pseudo is executive director. He doesn't have the title, but that's what a foundation would normally have, and they're like the CEO. They do call a lot of the shots on the business side anyway. We just happen to have split off the technical side to have a certain level of autonomy from that. The board calls the high-level shots like any board in any company, but they are not necessarily an executive board. They don't have people who execute. They make much more high-level decisions. So this makes sense from a business perspective, and also generally how it's used in government as well. I'd personally be comfortable with just executive. That's how it was originally, and it makes sense to me. And then technical team, I like that. I can change that.
Well, what about maybe sort of combining a little bit and doing like business executive team? That way, it's explicit in the name that this is a group, not an individual. But we still have that they're responsible for executing the business aspects of the project.
So if we take a back seat for a second and describe the groups as what their responsibilities are rather than naming the group, you could just literally say technical execution and business execution.
Right, now
I would agree with that.
That works for me.
I can get behind that.
Yeah.
Then
the other term I was going to suggest would be operation.
Which is why I shortened it down to executive, technical executive, and business executive, because to come up with a term to defer to that group. Well, what about executive team and technical team? Just to refer to the broad groups. No, we're not running bylaws here. We are trying to write something that describes the groups that exist and how they connect together in a way that is understandable to a fairly broad audience. And it's obviously it's not resonating as it is now. So let's change that and make sure it does resonate with people who sit on boards and are used to this kind of language.
So I think that the hard part here is that you're both drawing the lines of kind of responsibility for execution, and then also trying to name them a specific thing as if they can be held accountable as like a point of contact, and that's not necessarily true. Right? Like there are in those multiple points of contact and multiple points of communication between all of them. I mean, like even on the the marketing team, there are people from the technical side that we specifically made sure that they are there for that communication overhead. And I mean, you're like the technical side. Yes, the TSC is responsible for overseeing it all, so there is like a body that you can point to. But on the business execution side, it's a little bit fuzzier, right? Like some things go directly to the board, some things to me, some things will go to Tracy, some things go to various people in PR and marketing pretty directly. So it's not as easy to sort of say like, hey, here's a person or a role. Rather than just a sort of bundle of responsibilities for execution.
Yeah, except that I think the board would be viewing you in a CEO-like role, and if stuff started to go bad at the executive level, I think you would ultimately that, just like the TSC would be held responsible for stuff going bad on the technical side. I think like you're responsible for Tracy for making sure that she's doing the bit that she needs to do. You're responsible for guiding Zibby and the PR stuff. It does roll up, but it's in a much more classical business style than what we're doing on our end.
I think it's just a little bit different in that the TSC has certain responsibilities and autonomy carved out in the bylaws for things that they own. I might be held responsible for not getting certain things done, but I also don't have the authority to go off and do things that I just want to do. Like the board there has to be some kind of direction from the board, the membership, or you all. So that's the only thing that I think is a little bit different. I do think that you're right that I would get the mad phone call.
Right, you are essentially the executive arm of the board. You are the yeah, I know. I take that point that you are the limb of the board that gets things done.
So we're just over the hour. What do we actually need to move this forward from now? It seems like we're mostly in consensus that this is sort of what we already implicitly thought existed per se.
Yeah, the signal I'm getting is that there was concern about the mission thing. It seems like we've resolved that, which I'm glad that that seems like the major thing. The naming of the teams, I wouldn't mind pinning down ASAP. Would people be happy if we go ahead with executive team and technical team? I can yak shave with I can bike shed with Michael on the executive bit and find a term that might be more appropriate to what happens there. But if we head in that direction, executive team, technical team, is that acceptable? I want to be able to go to the board and say this is something that I've discussed with the TSC. It reflects TSC thinking. It's not officially blessed by the TSC in the way that I haven't got a vote on this, but this is where we're at, and this is what we would like to. We'd like to have agreement on this is how things operate, and this is the foundation upon which we're going to build. So if we don't have that level of faith or buy-in here, that's what I'm concerned about. I want to make sure we have enough buy-in. Because I can go and say this is my opinion and this is what I think should happen. Like I'm comfortable doing that, but my role on the board is a representative of the TSC.
Right. So do we just need are there objections? Like, are we in agreement versus are there objections?
Yeah. So far I haven't heard any objections, but I mean, let's just let's open it up. Man. Does anybody on the call right now object to where this is currently sitting? Okay. I think that pretty much answers that question.
Yeah.
I'll try. Great. Thanks very much. I'll try and engage on GitHub with the other questions that are outstanding there. Please throw them in if you'd like to tweak wording. I want to make sure this is understandable to people to normal people who read it. Okay. Let's do that. Let's go back to GitHub for that and get that resolved in the next day or two. Let's move quickly into a Q&A section. Q&A section. If anyone listening has questions or comments that they would like to make on anything, including what we've talked about today. So I think the YouTube feed and
Yeah.
which I don't know if we've actually advertised on the issue. Have we told people that the feed is even live there?
Oh, no, I didn't on the issue. I tweeted it and I put it in Node.dev on IRC. I also posted in the chat this time on the YouTube feed if they were asking for if there was any questions, because there was Q&A at the end, and there hasn't been any response. So. A little less in terms of viewers today. It's currently like 2.
Okay. Are there any objections to the suggestions to add William Kapke as a member of the TSC org or the repo, just to give him right privileges to help us with issue management, things that he seems to be passionate about. It's not adding him to the TSC, but it's giving him a bit more flexibility to get things done that we are not doing. We're doing a pretty poor job of managing that repo. Any objections to that?
Sounds like a good idea to me.
I think it's a good idea too.
Okay, I think we should go ahead and do that then. Okay, well, if there are no questions coming in, comments coming in from outside, let's finish it up. Thanks, everyone. I'm really sorry about not giving you ample time to digest this and provide really good feedback, but it has been valuable. And I will report back after next week, hopefully with a really solid path forward that we can, we have solid questions to answer about what it is that we're trying to do, that we can come up with a coherent strategy that we can get sign off across the foundation, and that we are in sync with executing this mission. So I'm looking forward to ticking those boxes, and I'll keep you informed of progress. So let's finish out. Thanks very much for attending and listening in.
Thanks.
Well.
Bye.
Bye.